Hey, I'm Tamara Kendacker, and you're listening to the Decibel from the Globe and Mail. Between 2015 and 2019, Iceland launched a grand experiment. The federal government teamed up with trade unions in the country to test out the concept of a 4-day work week. Instead of working 40 hours, 2,500 people worked 35 to 36 hours, but got paid the same amount they always did. They tried this out in a variety of places, from offices to hospitals to social services, and earlier this month, researchers said the pilot was a huge success. People reported being happier and having a better work-life balance, and employers said productivity increased or stayed the same. Now, 86% of Icelanders are working shorter hours or are on contracts that'll phase that in over the coming years. On the surface, this sounds wonderful, and it's not a foreign idea in Canada either, as we come out of the pandemic and a lot of us are rethinking our relationships to work. BC Premier John Horgan said last month, a 4-day work week is not off the table. There is a pilot project in the township of Zora, Ontario that's getting some attention, but Canada isn't Iceland. And as my guest today points out, there are a lot of people who wouldn't benefit from a 4-day work week.
And these are exactly the type of people that have so much volatility in their hours of work that they would not be able to benefit from a 4-day work week. Their job is defined by being available on demand.
Armine Yalnizyan is an economist and the Atkinson Fellow on the future of workers. We're going to talk about whether the 5-day work week is dead and whether the 4-day work week is the answer that we've been looking for. You're listening to The Decibel. Armine, hello. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Tamara.
So the pandemic is making a lot of us rethink how much we work. And one of the ideas that people are talking about again is the idea of the 4-day work week. And it seems like there is a bit of momentum around this idea right now. And I wonder why you think that is.
Oh, I think it's really important to understand that every once in a while, ideas catch fire. And the people that are talking about shorter work weeks are talking about them because they have enough paid work. We have over 2 million people in Canada that don't have any work and are looking for work, and many more who don't have enough hours of work or control over their working lives. And so, the question is one of control, absolutely. So we are probably talking about a minority of people that can even think seriously about a 4-day work week with a similarly 5-day rate of pay, because nobody's talking about 4 days of work for 4 days of pay. The macro story that affects everybody gives you an insight as to why we are talking about reduced work time, because workers' bargaining power may be tightening on the flip side of the pandemic, as it was in the run-up to the pandemic. Population aging did not pause, and population aging is about more people exiting the labor market than entering the labor market. The pandemic poured accelerant on that. More people over 55 left the labor market, and fewer people under the age of 25 entered the labor market. So the people that were still working are probably working longer hours and wanting to have more control over their hours.
So people are coming at this conversation from a variety of different places. But I wonder, how do you think the pandemic and the opportunity that a lot of us have had to work more flexible hours, to work remotely, how much is that making people rethink our relationship to work? And how does that contribute to people being attracted to this idea of a 4-day work week?
Oh, particularly for the people that have been able to work from home in professional jobs, where the workday seems to be protracted to forever, that you're never untethered. There's a blurring of the lines between work and life in one's home. Of course, that's going to lead to more people talking about, how do I get more control back over my time? How do I reduce the amount of time that I'm working? Just a gentle reminder that even at the peak of the pandemic in April of 2020, only 41% of people who were working from home. And only 22% of those people were working from home because of the pandemic. So this is a minority of people who are exposed to a new thing. And I want to compare that to 4% before the pandemic hit. So huge growth in the number of people working from home, no question about it, but always a minority.
There have been experiments in other places, like Germany tried to introduce a 4-day work week in the 90s. France tried it. And I was wondering why it didn't stick. What happened in those instances and why didn't the 4-day work week really work?
Well, what's fascinating about the early 1990s is every jurisdiction in the G7 and in the richest countries were dealing with almost 25 years of incredibly elevated unemployment rates. And they were looking for anything. By the time we got to the early 1990s, they were looking for anything that might redistribute working time. And that was a way to reduce long hours and create more work for more people. But somewhere around the mid-1990s, we got caught onto a new trajectory, which was the commodity supercycle, which created growth everywhere and lowered unemployment rates everywhere. And what was incredibly difficult to enforce through legislative mechanisms became abandoned, more or less. So there are still companies in Germany, like VW, that have got 4-day, like compressed work weeks so that people have 3 days off. They work longer hours for 4 days. They get paid really well, and they have 3 days off because that's what workers want. And that's the way they keep their workers happy. But again, this is more likely to be done company by company than by legislative mechanisms, because it's extremely difficult to enforce a 4-day work week. There will be too many carve-outs industry by industry. For example, construction or anything seasonal or anything related to the provision of care will be very difficult to regulate in a 4-day week because people want and need care in different doses, and construction and renovation and building takes place with a different cycle too. And don't forget, as consumers, we expect things to happen 24/7. So there's a lot of businesses that are going to lobby hard to make sure that happens.
Yeah, like in the post-pandemic environment, who do you think wouldn't benefit from a 4-day work week? Who would be left out of that?
Oh, I think it would be the minority of workers that would benefit, but particularly in the post-pandemic period. Look, in the wake of every recession, there's a spike in demand by employers for on-demand labor, for just-in-time labor. And this is the very first recession where we're coming out of a period of economic downturn. And there's an app for that. We're just seeing this proliferation, this mushrooming of digital platforms that permit you to match up a need for a task being done with a worker that's willing to do it. So it's just this like explosion of side hustle, which may be the majority of earnings for some people, or maybe simply supplementing a different type of job. We measure it very poorly, but we know it's growing and it will continue to grow. And these are exactly the type of people that don't have so much volatility in their hours of work that they would not be able to benefit from a 4-day work week. Their job is defined by being available on demand. Their incomes are defined by being available on demand, which means they're constantly tethered to their phone, to the workplace, which is their phone, for the next gig. And frankly, what's fascinating about this moment is in Ontario, which is the largest labor market in Canada, there is a task force dedicated to economic recovery and the future of work, which will be feeding into the government of Ontario's legislation to be tabled in the fall on the rules for work. And that will include whether you can even exercise any labor rights as a gig worker, because you might not be deemed an employee. And if you're not an employee, you don't get access to employment standards. And so there might be a growing swath of people that will be untouched by rules around 4-day work weeks.
This Iceland pilot project, a lot of people are talking about it and saying that it was really successful because it helped people work less. It improved their productivity. People reported being happier. And I wonder if you can talk about the potential benefits of a 4-day work week for companies that maybe want to try that out, or what we've learned from past experiments with this. What are the upsides of having a 4-day work week?
Oh, they are legion. Like being able to have more time that we call our own without reducing the income that we need to survive is obviously something that a lot of people want and could benefit from. But their numbers are probably in the minority. So we are looking at probably taking people who are already privileged in the type of work that they have hours of paid work, and that they can control their working time in any measure at all, being even more privileged in the way that they can control their time. Maybe time inequality is going to be the big story of the coming years for the workforce, right? It's like, who's got control over their time? It used to, the guys in the C-suite used to say time is money, but it doesn't just apply to the C-suite executives. It applies to all of us. The question is, whose time is worth money?
So the underlying problem that the idea of a 4-day work week seems to be trying to address is that people feel like they just work too much and that they don't have time to live their lives. And so how do you address that aside from the 4-day work week in a way that would help more people than people who are currently working a 5-day work week?
I think there are 3 ways of introducing more control to people who are working too much. Some might have benefit from changing laws and regulations, and that might not be just a 4-day work week. It could be things like, how much time do you get off when you have a new child? How much paid sick leave do you get? What are the rules around being paid while you're training and upgrading? Does that happen on the job so you're getting paid, or do you have to pay for it out of pocket through time off the job? So changing the rules around who can get income support and who can get paid leaves to do the things that are necessary in life is one way of reducing the amount of hours over the course of the year, over the course of your life, that you are connected to the workplace. And that could be things like statutory holidays or paid vacations, right? So the second way of doing it is by having more workplaces really keen on attracting the best and brightest and keeping them by improving wages and working conditions. And we're already seeing signs of that. And I guess the third way is that workers get together and organize for their own collective benefit to improve their wages and working conditions. It's fascinating to me that Gig Workers United is all about control over their time. Like, it's being able to have a pee break while you're on delivery. It's about being able to be paid for the time you are getting to the next job, because that's part of doing the job, is getting there. So this whole conception of how is your time being compensated for rather than the wage rate or any other type of benefit is critical to collective bargaining also. So I think those are the 3 mechanisms that people can get more control. It won't be a one-trick pony. It won't be the 4-day work week through legislation, but I think having more control over time for those who are working too many hours and too many unpaid hours will be a real key feature of the post-pandemic economic recovery.
And are we seeing any movement in that direction in Canada?
Oh, 100%. You're starting to see all 3 things. As we had a big fight for 10 paid sick days. That ain't over yet. We're having court cases with Uber as to whether people are employees or workers and whether that means they get to access those rights or not. We are seeing workplaces that are offering better wages and working conditions, which include a better balance of time and time off for companies that really want to attract the best and brightest and retain them in a world which will be marked by more labor and skill shortages. And we are seeing an acceleration of workers trying to organize themselves and bargain collectively to have better working conditions. And now, as the boomers approach their twilight years and their immortality is guaranteed to not exist, expect more conversations about time, how we are using our time, what life is for, what the purpose is of life, and a real contestation of the idea that our lives should be dedicated to our employers and our devotion should be to our job, not our families and the people that we love. There's going to be a real interesting conversation about how we allocate this fleeting moment that we call life.
Okay, Armine, thank you so much for helping me think through this and helping us imagine something better. Thank you so much.
Oh, listen, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. It really made me think about that resource that we all share 100% in common and totally and equally measure our time. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We all have the exact same amount. It's just control over how we use it. That is going to be a really big topic for discussion.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Tamara Kandaker. Our producers are Madeline White and Kasia Mihailovich. This episode was edited by Michal Stein. David Crosby is our editor, and Angela Pacenza is our executive editor. Thank you so much to Armine Yalnizyan. You can find her work at futureofworkers.substack.com. If you want to reach us, we're at thedecibel@globemail.com. You can tweet me at anima_TK. Let us know what stories you want us to cover next. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.